James Gunn never misses. DC is back, now in the shape or form of a fresh rebooted universe, the DCEU. Bringing James Gunn out of his Marvel career and instead leading him as the new chairman of DC, you've got a very promising star here. And once again, we're starting things off with everyone's favourite superhero, Superman. After staring at some of the blandest DC movies of all time, diving into James Gunn's Superman was one hell of an experience. I enjoyed every bit of it. I liked David Corenswet as the title character. I also liked how it felt like a comic book adaptation on the big screen. And also how it brings new life for the beloved DC characters. So, how did James Gunn continue his winning streak at the superhero genre? What makes this first DCU movie a joy to witness? And what type of nostalgia does it bring back from its original film series? In today's movie review, I will be talking about James Gunn's Superman. Let's see how the Man of Tomorrow begins his saga of films on a very high note. Eyes up here, it begins. First off, I would like to point out that this movie definitely brings DC straight back on track. Oh jeez, I remember. The DCEU, one of the most pathetic set of action movies I've ever seen, and nothing else was working at all. So James Gunn had to find a way around this. Gone is Zack Snyder and his toxic fan base. Now we return to the basics on what truly makes a DC movie back to life. There will be returning characters like John Cena as Peacemaker, and the return of Jason Momoa, albeit as Lobo instead. But it's mostly going to focus on a new take on DC. Such franchise starter like this is pretty similar to how Iron Man kickstarted the MCU back in 2008. Like that movie, this gives audiences the world building, characters, scenery, and everything they need to dive into this new superhero world. And now that James Gunn is all on the DC table, you will get some good treats from this universe for at least another good 10 years. It has some massive potential going forward, and I'm very excited to see what they do next. Secondly, a big shout out here without a doubt. The voice talents are just amazing and way better than last time. I really did enjoy David Corenswet as Clark Kent, aka Superman. He reminds me of Christopher Reeves' performance and is way better than Henry Cavill, basically bringing truth and justice to his character with lots of good and witty dialogue. Rachel Brosnahan as Lois Lane was also pretty spot on. Nicholas Hunt was without a doubt the best part, as he gives a very villainous portrayal as Lex Luthor. He ensures to make the character feel like the arch nemesis he truly is to Superman, being out of control and insane. Everyone else also did really well as the characters in the surrounded environment, and they make the characters get some amazing development, having some strong focus with emotion and restlessness. I never felt this engaged with the characters in a superhero movie in years, but James Gunn brings that sense of magical drama back. Oh, and yes, Crypto, I have not forgotten about you. A scene stealer that is the highlight of every part he's in. For a superhero movie, Gunn manages to bring all the elements that one should have, much like his Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy. In addition, it's just like how it all was with the first two classic Superman movies. It blends humor with heart and plenty of action. It perfectly matches Superman's character as a light of hope. Uplifting and also lightly amusing. This is the type of environment you'd want from a well-written standalone Superman movie. It's a well-toned, grounded and emotionally tear-jerking experience with some good comedic timing also helping itself pause from its climaxes. Back to talking about Krypto, he will captivate especially the younger viewers and dog lovers. There's a good sense of joy and humour he brings to the table to help match what this movie is having. I also remember just how dark the DC movies were during those times. This is just an extremely overwhelming experience that made me felt like I was a little boy watching the first Superman all over again. For a modern day movie that brings in a new series of films, it helps stand out on its own by paying some great tribute to its title character's series and a hefty load of nostalgia. Like seriously, everything about it just gives me chills, dude. The film's soundtrack is epic as hell. It's very John Williams-like, even using some of those classic themes now remastered in 2025 fashion. Every single time a track played during an action scene with its loud notes, I got massive goosebumps. It was such an odd feeling. I never felt this happy watching a superhero film in so long. The visual style is also an absolute treat. It captures those magic visual effects of the classic Superman movie, bringing both powerful and magical scenery with Superman's flights and CGI effects. The camera style is also very great, with some good and realistic camera angles making those said flight scenes truly come to life. One more piece of nostalgia that's done right is how it always feels very lighthearted and never too dark or quirky like it was back in the DCEU. It's back to when things were nice and simplified. To conclude this positive flight, this film has a story that works absolutely wonders. It's dead simple. Usually standalone experiences like this have a typical origin story, and they also like to repeat it in reboots, etc. Here, they made an absolute smart decision. This time, you don't get to see Superman's origins, but rather during the opening scene where they tell you how he became who he is, albeit with some text. If we had retold his origin story right from scratch, even with some good changes to its old formula, the first act for this movie would have been one of the most sluggish acts for a DC movie. If that wasn't enough, it has some very good narrative shifts to help assemble its big group of cast characters by giving them some good development, arcs, and just overall being very well written so that it doesn't become boring. As what the producers of this movie said, this is just the beginning of what would become a new path for DC. Here's to hoping things are even more legendary for them at the studio. Superman is how you effectively start the DCU on a very high note. Not just because he's the first superhero to join the flight, but also getting the things that it gets right in which Man of Steel got wrong. Blending nostalgia with its John Williams-esque music, the characters get some amazing development, and David Corenswet is very great as the title character, and everyone else is just as talented. Krypto is a scene stealer, like seriously. What a good boy. The action scenes aren't in very high numbers, but they still thrill on big levels, especially on IMAX. There's also plenty of humour and heart like in the original two Superman movies. The visual style is gorgeous, good chance that this movie will be nominated for Best Visual Effects at the 98th Academy Awards next year, calling it now. The story is something for all viewers as it's not a complete rehash filled with unnecessary plot threads, and it brings DC back to glorious new heights after releasing some awful and sluggish movies. This was definitely one of my most anticipated movies of this year. I didn't feel much at first, but the trailers hooked me so hard. It's one of those films. One that actually manages to live up to its hype. James Gunn is an absolute legend, and he just never misses. Superman is the comic book movie that does its original source material, truth and justice. Bringing truth, justice, and a better tomorrow to the newly formed DCEU, James Gunn's Superman ascends to renowned altitude, blending clever wit and hefty spectacle to make for a wondrous, charmingly virtuous time. My final score for the first installment in the DCU is a 10 out of 10 and a grade S. Post-COVID wise, it's one of the best superhero movies delivered after the pandemic. It even rivals some older superhero movies, but also has some ways to go to match up against the best ones that are still widely considered a timeless classic. I always loved Superman ever since I was a kid. Today, my passion for the character has returned to glorious levels. Now that James Gunn is in control of DC for a good while, I can only hope that the movies that are delivered in the series can shaft the DCEU out of existence for good. But with that being said, leave a like on this video if you guys did enjoy my review on Superman, and also remember to subscribe if you are new, and hit that bell icon to see more content on my channel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you all later. Take care of yourselves.